Welcome to Revenge Report. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more. Let's dive in. I hadn't been back in my hometown for 5 years, not since I left the army and started a new life. But when I got the news about Grandpa, I didn't hesitate. Colonel James Caldwell wasn't just my grandfather, he was a legend. The kind of man people stood up straighter when they talked about. I'd always been proud to be his granddaughter. The funeral was in the old chapel where we'd had so many family gatherings over the years. Walking through those familiar doors felt surreal. The soft glow of candles and the smell of roses and incense hit me immediately. It was strange to think that I was back in this place, under these circumstances. I didn't bother with anything fancy. I wore my military uniform. It felt right, respectful. I didn't want anyone forgetting who he was, who we were. My boots clicked on the marble floor and I noticed a few people glancing over, recognizing me. I wasn't sure if they were surprised to see me in uniform or surprised that I'd even come back. It had been a while. As I made my way up the aisle, I spotted him, Julian, my brother. He was standing near the front, leaning against a pillar, arms crossed, looking as smug as ever. When he saw me, the corner of his mouth twitched, and I knew something was off. We hadn't spoken much in recent years, and I could feel the tension in the air. "You finally decided to show up?" Julian's voice cut through the low murmur of the crowd. He wasn't trying to be subtle. His eyes bore into me like he was daring me to say something back. I wasn't in the mood to fight, especially not here, but I wasn't going to let him get away with this. "Better late than never," I said flatly, making my way past him. He scoffed, but I didn't care. The funeral was supposed to be about Grandpa, about honoring his life. Instead, it felt like an endless game of trying to outdo one another. Julian was always like that, always needling, always trying to get a rise out of me. I took my seat near the back, far enough to keep my distance from him, but close enough to the altar where I could see the casket. The service began, and I tried to focus on what was happening, but my mind kept drifting back to Julian. There was something off about him, something in his eyes. That's when I noticed the three men sitting together in the second row. They didn't look like regular mourners. They didn't even seem to care about the ceremony. Their eyes were scanning the room like they were looking for something or someone. They looked out of place, too polished, too quiet. They didn't belong in a family funeral. I shifted in my seat, my military instincts kicking in. Something wasn't right. I wasn't sure what, but my gut told me this was more than just a funeral. The whole thing felt staged, like everyone was pretending to mourn while something much bigger was going on beneath the surface. I glanced at Julian again, but now he was talking to one of the strangers. The man was taller, with a stiff posture and dark sunglasses that seemed out of place indoors. My brother was laughing, but it didn't feel like the laugh of someone mourning the loss of their grandfather. It felt forced. Something in the back of my mind clicked, and I knew I had to get out of here. The funeral might have been a cover for something much larger. But what? My thoughts were interrupted by the priest's voice, signaling that the ceremony was about to start. I turned my attention to the front, but my senses were on high alert. This wasn't just a funeral, it was a warning. The funeral chapel was filled with mourners, but as I scanned the room, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. Julian had just made his mocking comment, and now, as the service began, I found myself sitting in the back, eyes scanning every person, trying to make sense of what was happening. The familiar faces of our relatives, the quiet sobs, the respectful murmurs. It should have felt like any other funeral, but this was different. I watched Julian closely. He was sitting with some distant relatives, but I knew that posture, that smirk. He wasn't here to mourn. He wasn't here for Grandpa. He was here for something else. I could feel it in my bones. He was playing some kind of game. I shifted my gaze to the front of the room, but my eyes kept straying back to Julian. He wasn't even pretending to mourn. His head was tilted back slightly, like he was too good for this, and his fingers were drumming on the pew in a rhythm that felt way too deliberate. Then, as if on cue, he caught my eye. His smirk grew, just a fraction, but enough to send a chill down my spine. It was almost like he knew something I didn't, something I was supposed to know. It wasn't until my eyes slid past him that I saw them. 3 men, all in the second row. They weren't family. I didn't recognize them, and they certainly didn't belong here. Their faces were all sharp and serious, like they were here on business, not to mourn. They weren't even pretending to pay attention to the service. Their heads were turned in strange angles, scanning the room, watching everyone with calculating eyes. It was like they were looking for something, maybe someone. I held my breath for a moment, locking eyes with one of them. He didn't flinch. Instead, he subtly adjusted his earpiece. That was all it took. I knew then. These men weren't here by accident. They were operatives. They were part of something. I looked away quickly, trying to calm my racing thoughts. My heart started to pound in my chest. My instinct kicked in. I had been trained to recognize these kinds of signs, to spot covert operatives in a crowd. This was not a funeral. This was a cover-up. I tried to focus on the ceremony, but the feeling of being watched, of being on alert, never left. Julian's voice still echoed in my mind, his mocking tone from earlier, but I couldn't ignore the feeling of danger rising like a tide inside me. The funeral had barely begun, and already, I was sure it was masking something much larger, something dangerous. I needed to get out of there. Quietly, I stood up from my seat, motioning for Kyle, who had been standing off to the side. He met my eyes, and I could see the question in his gaze. "Something's wrong," I whispered. Kyle nodded, his face hardening with concern. We didn't need to exchange words. We knew how to move quickly, how to stay low. We left the chapel, the heavy doors closing softly behind us. The cool air hit me like a relief, but it didn't last. I could still feel the weight of everything happening inside that chapel. It wasn't just about Grandpa anymore. This was bigger, darker, and somehow I was wrapped up in it. Once we were in the car, I reached into my bag and pulled out my secure device. It buzzed with a familiar hum, and my fingers flew over the screen, opening a secure channel. Julian's name flashed in front of me as I scrolled through the connections on the encrypted network. My heart skipped a beat. There it was. Julian was connected to something much larger than I had ever realized. I didn't hesitate. My fingers moved swiftly, typing out the coded message I had used only a handful of times in my career. It was a signal to the federal authorities, my way of alerting them that something was going on, something that needed their attention. This wasn't just a funeral, it was a setup. I hit send and leaned back in my seat, feeling a tight knot form in my stomach. I glanced over at Kyle, who was silent beside me. I could see the worry etched in his face, the concern that we might be stepping into something we couldn't control. "Do you think Julian is involved?" Kyle asked quietly, breaking the silence. "I don't know," I muttered, gripping the device in my hand. "But whatever it is, it's bigger than we thought." As I stared out the windshield, the weight of what I'd just done settled in. I'd alerted the authorities. This was no longer just about family, it was about national security. I didn't know how deep this went, but I was about to find out. The car ride was a blur. I couldn't stop replaying the funeral in my head. The strange men in the chapel, Julian's behavior, the sense that something was dangerously off. As Kyle drove, I clutched my secure device, still buzzing with that sense of urgency. The feeling gnawed at me. What had I just uncovered? What was Julian really involved in? Kyle glanced over at me as we pulled up to the house, his expression still one of concern. "You're sure about this, Daria?" he asked, his voice quiet but serious. I nodded, unable to say more. The weight of the situation pressed down on me, but I couldn't quite process it all yet. My mind kept returning to a conversation I had with Grandpa just days before his death. It was the only time he'd ever sounded unsettled, even though he was always the stoic, unshakable figure in our family. I pulled my phone out and scrolled through the encrypted messages in my memory. It wasn't the first time I'd received a strange call from him, but this one stood out. "Daria, listen to me. If anything happens to me, you need to look deeper into Julian. Something's been reactivated. He's involved in something that goes back to the Cold War, something that you won't understand at first, but you'll know the signs if you pay attention." I could still hear Grandpa's raspy voice in my head as I replayed the conversation. "Operation Peregrine, Daria, you need to look for the signs. If anything happens to me, you're the one who needs to dig. It's all coming back, and your brother, he's part of it. Don't trust everything you see." It was so cryptic, and at the time, I didn't give it the weight it deserved. But now it felt like everything Grandpa had said was suddenly real. Julian had been acting strangely at the funeral, mocking, smug, and yet trying to play the role of the grieving family member. That wasn't like him. It had to be connected to something deeper. Operation Peregrine, whatever that was, had to be the key. My thoughts were interrupted when Kyle pulled the car into the driveway, cutting the engine with a soft click. He glanced at me again, concern etched on his face. "I get that you think Julian's involved in something dangerous, but why doesn't this feel like a coincidence? What exactly do you think Grandpa meant by reactivated?" I sighed, leaning back in my seat. The entire conversation with Kyle felt surreal, like we were stepping into something we weren't prepared for. What had Grandpa seen? Why hadn't I taken him more seriously before? I think I think my brother's involved in something much bigger than just some random family drama, I muttered, more to myself than to Kyle. Grandpa mentioned something about reactivation, and that's what scares me. He was always so precise with his words. Kyle stayed quiet for a moment, letting my words hang in the air. He wasn't fully convinced, but he trusted my instincts. And when it came to matters like these, my instincts were honed from years of military training. "What do we do now?" he asked finally, turning to face me. I hesitated. "I'm going to look deeper. I need to get into Grandpa's files. He mentioned signs. He left me something. I'm sure of it." We sat in the car for a while, the weight of the situation pressing down on both of us. Kyle knew what this meant for us. If I was right, it wasn't just about Julian anymore. It was about everything Grandpa had worked on in secret. Something from the past, something that had been hidden from us for years. With a heavy sigh, I opened the door and stepped out of the car, my resolve solidifying. "Let's go," I said, glancing at Kyle. "The truth is waiting." We headed inside, and I quickly retrieved the encrypted device I used for secure communications. It was time to take the next step. I had to make contact with the right people, those who would know how deep this went. I found myself dialing the secure number, my heart pounding in my chest. I wasn't sure who exactly I needed to speak with, but I knew someone would know about Operation Peregrine and what it meant for Julian. Someone would know what I was up against. After a few tense seconds, a voice came through on the other end. "Daria Caldwell," the voice said, low and calm. "What's the situation?" I paused for a moment, gathering my thoughts. The urgency of the situation hit me all at once. "I think my brother's involved in a reactivated Cold War operation," I said. My voice sounded more steady than I felt. "I don't know exactly what it is, but I've seen the signs. I need you to look into something. Operation Peregrine." The voice on the other end was silent for a moment and then responded, "We'll look into it. Stay secure and don't act on anything until we have confirmation." I disconnected the call and stared at the device in my hand. This was it. I had taken the first step toward unraveling everything. But I couldn't help feeling the heavy weight of what was coming next. "I've done what I can," I said, turning to Kyle. "Now we wait. But Julian's not going to slip by unnoticed." "Not this time." Kyle nodded, though I could tell he wasn't entirely sure where this path would lead us. But his support was unwavering. I appreciated that now more than ever. We weren't just family anymore. We were partners in this. As I sat down at the kitchen table, I couldn't help but think about my grandfather's warning. "Look for the signs." Well, Grandpa, I had seen enough. It was time to figure out exactly what Julian was tangled up in. And when I found out, I wasn't sure what I'd do next, but I'd face it head on. The hunt for the truth had begun. The house felt suffocating. The quiet hum of the refrigerator was the only sound that accompanied us as we entered. Kyle followed me into the living room, his footsteps hesitant. He knew how important this was, how much it meant to me to uncover what my grandfather had left behind. But there was something heavier in the air now, a tension that lingered since we left the funeral home. I had a feeling the truth was closer than I realized, and the closer we got to it, the more uncertain I became about what lay ahead. I needed answers. And Grandpa's garage had always been a place filled with history, secrets, and memories of his time in the military. I'd spent countless hours there as a kid, organizing his old military memorabilia, listening to him recount stories from his time in service, but I'd never known there was more hidden beneath the surface. Not until now. "Are you sure about this?" Kyle asked, glancing around the familiar space. "It's not like you haven't looked in here before." I nodded. "I haven't found everything yet." Grandpa always said there were things he could never show me until the time was right. I walked toward the far corner of the garage, where Grandpa's old tool chest stood, dust-covered but sturdy. Beside it, a locked gun safe sat quietly, almost mocking me with its silence. My mind flashed back to the countless afternoons spent with Grandpa, him teaching me how to maintain his rifles, how to keep things in working order. I never imagined that safe held something far more important than just military gear. The old code was still fresh in my mind, the one Grandpa had taught me when I was a teenager, just in case I ever needed to open it. My fingers trembled as I entered the combination. The familiar click echoed through the garage, and the door swung open, revealing a trove of documents and files. I grabbed the first file that caught my eye, its label barely legible. "Project Peregrine." The words jumped off the page, freezing me in place. I hadn't imagined I'd ever see that name again. It was a Cold War operation, one that my grandfather had worked on in secret, but had always been cryptic about. I never understood its true significance, but now, staring at the faded pages, I knew it was more than just a relic of the past. As I flipped through the pages, my stomach twisted. The files were detailed, revealing names, contacts, and coded language that went far beyond my understanding. I skimmed over intelligence reports and covert operations, some from decades ago, others marked as active. And then it hit me. The names and contacts in these files weren't just military personnel, they were connected to a shadow network, one that spanned the globe, operating under the radar, hiding in plain sight. I paused when I saw a name I never expected: Julian, my brother. He wasn't just a passive participant, he was deeply involved. The evidence was clear: his connection to the operation, his role in reactivating it. The weight of the discovery hit me hard. I had suspected something, but to see it laid out like this, it was more than I could process. "Daria, look at this," I muttered, my voice barely audible as I flipped the pages faster now. Kyle stood by, watching me in silence, sensing the gravity of what I had just uncovered. His hand rested lightly on my shoulder, a small comfort in the sea of confusion. "What is it? What does it mean?" I swallowed hard, not able to answer immediately. I had to piece it all together, but the more I read, the clearer it became. Julian had been playing a dangerous game, and it wasn't just some family squabble. This was about global security, covert operations that spanned continents, all led by a man I had once called my brother. "Julian is involved in something much bigger than I thought," I said, my voice steady despite the shock I was feeling. "These aren't just files. This is evidence of a reactivation of an operation Grandpa warned me about." I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, but I wasn't about to back down now. This wasn't just about protecting my family. It was about stopping something dangerous from spreading further. I had to act. "I need to secure these files," I muttered, reaching for my phone. "I need to upload them to the authorities. It's the only way to stop him." Kyle didn't say anything right away, but I saw the worry in his eyes. I knew he was thinking the same thing I was. How far had Julian gone? What had he done to get involved in something this large? But there was no time to dwell on the questions right now. I needed to act. I carefully took photos of the files, making sure to capture every detail, every page that mentioned Julian, every connection. This was the key. And once I had everything secured, I could finally alert the right people. I looked at Kyle, and for the first time in days, I felt a sense of certainty. "I'm sending this in," I said. "There's no turning back now." He nodded, his face filled with concern but also a quiet support. "You're doing the right thing, Daria. We'll handle this together." As I secured the last of the documents and prepared to upload them, I couldn't help but think of my grandfather, the trust he had in me. The weight of his words echoed in my mind. Look for the signs. I had found them, and now it was time to make sure Julian paid for his actions. The garage was quiet, except for the sound of my phone connecting to the secure network. I sent the files off, feeling a strange mix of relief and dread wash over me. "I've done it," I said, exhaling deeply. "It's in their hands now." But as I sat there, staring at the empty garage, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Julian's game wasn't over, and I had no idea how deep this rabbit hole went. The reception was in full swing when we returned. The chatter and clinking of glasses seemed almost deafening compared to the silence I'd left behind in the chapel. The funeral had ended, and now we were in that awkward space between mourning and moving on, where the reality of our family's loss was replaced by forced smiles and small talk. It was a far cry from the somberness I'd hoped for. But as soon as we stepped into the crowded room, I spotted Julian. He was standing by the bar, holding court with a few people who seemed to be hanging on his every word. He wasn't supposed to be the center of attention today. He wasn't supposed to be anything but a grieving grandson. And yet, here he was, smug as ever, talking about things I couldn't yet fully understand. "Looks like he's really trying to sell the family legacy," Kyle muttered, eyeing Julian from across the room. His voice was low, but I knew what he meant. Julian wasn't just talking about Grandpa's achievements anymore. He was weaving in names, references, like he was trying to see who in this room might bite. I hadn't imagined Julian was this good at playing the game, but it didn't stop there. As I moved closer, I heard the words he said next, words that stuck with me like a dagger in the chest. "You know, Grandpa always had connections to Panama. That was where things really took off for him with Operation Peregrine," Julian said, laughing casually, as if the phrase wasn't a time bomb. I froze. My heart skipped a beat. Operation Peregrine, the name that Grandpa had mentioned in his cryptic phone call. The operation I had no idea was tied to my brother, but I knew now that Julian had been involved. He had baited me with that word, and now I was certain he was testing the waters. The room buzzed around us, but I could feel the cold sweat on the back of my neck as the weight of the words settled in. Julian was aware. He was aware of what I had uncovered, and he was seeing who would react to his mention of the operation. He had played me perfectly. I caught his eyes across the room. His smug expression grew wider, and for a moment, I saw the faintest flicker of something darker behind his smile, like a challenge, a taunt. He wasn't just boasting. He was daring me to make a move to show that I knew something I shouldn't. Kyle, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, moved closer to me. "He's testing you, isn't he?" he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded slowly, my mind racing. I didn't know what to do next. I couldn't make a scene. Not here, not now. But I had to let him know I was on to him. I had to play along, at least for now. As Julian continued to talk to the group, I made my way to the far corner of the room, out of his line of sight. I had to think fast. Kyle stayed close, his eyes constantly scanning the crowd. It wasn't just Julian I was worried about anymore. The strange men from the chapel had to be part of whatever scheme he was involved in. They were here for a reason, and it wasn't just to mourn. "I need to leave," I said, my voice steady but urgent. "I can't stay here much longer. He's testing me. And if he's testing me, then it's only a matter of time before he makes his move." Kyle didn't argue. He just nodded, his expression hardening. "Let's get out of here. You're right, but we need to stay alert. If this is what I think it is, Julian's game is far from over." I didn't even wait for a reply before I turned and started walking toward the door. I needed to put distance between myself and Julian, but I couldn't leave without first making sure I was prepared for what came next. He was clearly aware of the fact that I had started digging into his life, and now I needed to figure out how deep this web really went. As we stepped outside into the cool evening air, I pulled out my secure device once more. It was time to send a message to the authorities. I had already tipped them off with the initial code, but I needed to keep them informed about Julian's latest move. It was one thing to suspect he was involved in something sinister. It was another to know for sure that he was actively testing me, and maybe, just maybe, trying to get me to reveal more than I was prepared to. I opened the encrypted messaging app, typed quickly, my fingers trembling only slightly. "Julian is aware of my investigation. He mentioned Operation Peregrine. He's testing those around him. Be ready." I hit send. The message was secure, but the implications weren't. I had no idea what Julian would do next, but I wasn't going to let him pull the strings any longer. I pocketed the device and turned to Kyle. "We've got to stay ahead of him," I said, my voice firm. "This is bigger than we thought. He's playing the game, but I'm not going to let him win." Kyle met my eyes, his expression full of understanding, and nodded. "Let's make sure he doesn't." And so, as the funeral reception carried on behind us, I realized that Julian's little bait had just begun the final stage of the game. I had walked into this expecting to protect my family. Now, I had to prepare to expose its darkest secrets, and I wasn't sure if I'd be able to live with the cost of what I might uncover. The house was filled with the sound of clinking silverware and soft laughter, but to me, it all felt like background noise. Dinner was underway at my parents' house, the air thick with tension. The same people who had once surrounded me with love and pride now barely spoke to me, like I was a stranger in my own family. My mother had barely made eye contact since I confronted her about Julian. But even more than that, I couldn't ignore the fact that I had uncovered something much more dangerous than I had ever anticipated. I sat at the dining table, pushing my food around on my plate, my mind elsewhere. Kyle sat across from me, his face a mix of concern and disbelief. He'd seen the files too. He knew what Julian had been involved in, what my brother had been doing behind our backs. The cold, hard truth of it all was too much to swallow, even for me. Dinner passed in uncomfortable silence. My mother had done her best to act as though everything was normal, but I could feel her tension radiating from the other side of the table. She still refused to believe the evidence. Every time I mentioned Julian's criminal dealings, she dismissed it with a shake of her head, as though somehow I was wrong. "He's your brother, Daria," she would say, her voice trembling with denial. "He couldn't have done this. Not Julian. He was always the good one." But he wasn't. I knew it. Kyle knew it. And now, I had the proof. My mind flashed back to the folder I had found earlier. The photographs, the records detailing Julian's illicit dealings with classified military files, and his connections to cryptocurrency exchanges that didn't sit right. I had found evidence of his involvement in Operation Peregrine, more than I had ever imagined. The sheer scope of it was enough to shake me to my core. Still, I couldn't let my emotions show. I couldn't let my mother's blind devotion to her son get in the way of what needed to be done. As the dinner wound down, I quietly excused myself and made my way upstairs, feeling Kyle's eyes on me as I left. The time had come. I couldn't let Julian walk away from this. My family might never understand, but I knew one thing for sure. Julian's actions were a threat to everything Grandpa had worked for, everything we had sworn to protect. I closed the door behind me and locked it, knowing that I needed to do this alone. No more distractions, no more lies. I pulled out my secure device and for the first time, felt the weight of what I was about to do. I knew the consequences. My brother's betrayal meant that there was no going back. I uploaded the files, carefully, securely. The authorities needed to see everything, every document, every transaction, every detail that Julian had hidden in plain sight. The moment I pressed send, I knew there was no turning back. I sat there for a moment, staring at the screen, as if expecting Julian to walk through the door and explain everything away. But I knew better. There was no more pretending. He was no longer the brother I had once known. He was a traitor. The knock on the door startled me. Kyle. I didn't need to ask. "You did it, didn't you?" he said, his voice low, but his eyes were filled with understanding. He didn't have to ask what I meant. He knew exactly what I had done. I nodded. "It's done. I've sent everything." His face softened, but he didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The truth hung heavy between us. "What now?" he asked after a beat. I stood up, feeling the weight of my decision settle in my chest. "Now, we wait, and when they come for him, we'll be ready." Kyle's expression was a mixture of admiration and worry. "You think Julian will fight it?" I paused, my gaze fixed on the window. The house felt smaller, like it was closing in on me. "I don't think he has a choice, but I'm not doing this for him. I'm doing it because it's the right thing." The silence that followed was thick with unspoken thoughts. I knew Kyle was worried about the impact this would have on our family, about the consequences for me, but he also knew I couldn't sit idly by. This was bigger than blood. It was about protecting the country, about exposing the truth. "We'll deal with the fallout together," Kyle said finally. His voice was steady, even if his eyes betrayed his concern. "But no matter what, you did the right thing." I nodded, swallowing the lump that had formed in my throat. The weight of the situation was suffocating, but I knew there was no other choice. Julian's fate had been sealed the moment he crossed that line. Now it was up to the authorities to finish what I had started. As I sat back down on the edge of the bed, I glanced at the clock. It was late. The house was quiet save for the muffled sounds of my parents downstairs. They had no idea what was coming. They had no idea what their son had done. "I just hope they move fast," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Kyle placed a hand on my shoulder. "They will, and you'll have the support you need. But remember, you're not alone in this. You've got me." The moment was heavy with the weight of our shared understanding. The time for denial was over. And now, there was only the hard, cold truth. The reception hall was still buzzing with low conversation and clinking glasses, but it all felt distant, muffled to me. The weight of everything I had uncovered about Julian, the covert operation, the secrecy, it hung over me like a storm cloud, ready to break. I couldn't shake the image of those men in the chapel or the sound of Julian's casual boasting. It all felt like a bad dream, but I knew it was real. And now, the authorities were on their way. Kyle and I sat quietly at the edge of the room, away from the crowd. His hand rested on my knee, a silent gesture of support. I could feel the tension radiating from him too. We both knew what was coming, but it didn't make it any easier. I had tipped off federal agents earlier, and now we were waiting for the moment when everything would change. I couldn't look at Julian. The smug look on his face earlier, as if he had everything under control, kept playing in my mind. He knew the game was over, but he didn't know how much I'd uncovered. How much the authorities knew. That's what terrified him, I realized, and soon enough they would move in. He would be exposed. The betrayal would no longer be hidden. "I never thought it would come to this," Kyle said quietly, his voice full of disbelief. He was watching Julian across the room, who was now talking animatedly to a few family members, as if nothing was wrong. He had no idea what was about to happen. "Your brother, Daria, he was always the golden boy." I nodded, my mind racing with everything I had learned. Julian had always been the one to get our parents' approval, always the one who made the family proud. I had never even suspected that under all the charm and bravado, he could be hiding something this dark. We can't change what's already happened, I said, my voice firmer than I felt. But I'm making sure he doesn't get away with it. Kyle gave me a reassuring squeeze. You did the right thing. I looked at him and smiled weakly. The truth was, I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure how the rest of the family would react. They had no idea what Julian was involved in, and I knew they would never believe it. My mom would probably still defend him, claiming he was just trying to protect his family, but I couldn't let that stop me. National security was at risk, and Julian's actions were a direct threat. From across the room, I saw a few people glance nervously toward the door. They must have sensed something was off. The atmosphere had shifted. The tension in the air was palpable, but no one could put a finger on it. I stood up, moving toward the back of the room, out of sight. Kyle followed me, his eyes scanning the crowd. We moved swiftly, keeping to the shadows, just in case anyone noticed our departure. I had to remind myself that what was about to happen wasn't about family anymore. It was about doing the right thing, no matter the personal cost. I reached for my phone and sent one final message to the federal agents. It's time! Surround the premises and wait for my signal. Moments later, I saw the first sign. A federal agent blending in with the crowd made his move, walking toward the front of the room. I could see the others stationed around the building, ready to act. My heart pounded in my chest, but I felt a strange calmness wash over me. Then, without warning, the agents moved. It was smooth, quiet, almost too smooth, like a well-oiled machine. Julian didn't even see it coming. Daria, Kyle whispered, grabbing my arm. It's happening. I nodded, my pulse quickening. This was it. In the span of seconds, federal agents flooded into the room, surrounding Julian, who had been caught mid-sentence, his smug smile faltering as they closed in. He froze. His eyes scanned the room, confusion and panic slowly creeping into his expression. Julian Caldwell, one of the agents called out in a firm, steady voice, "You're under arrest for espionage and conspiracy involving classified military documents and illegal cryptocurrency transactions." The room went silent. It felt like time had slowed. The shocked gasps and whispers spread like wildfire as Julian was swiftly escorted out of the building. I stood there, watching as my brother was taken into custody. His eyes met mine for a split second. Fear, anger, and betrayal flashed across his face. But I saw something else too. Guilt. His eyes betrayed him. He knew he was caught, and there was no way out. For a moment, I felt nothing but the weight of the truth pressing down on me. This was the moment everything changed. The secret that had lingered in my family for so long was finally exposed. The person I had once called family, my brother, was now a criminal, and the truth had come to light. As Julian was led away, I couldn't help but feel the enormity of what had just transpired. This wasn't just about catching a traitor. It was about protecting the country from the damage my brother had caused, damage that could have spiraled out of control if I had stayed silent. But I didn't, and for that, I could hold my head high. The funeral reception, once a place of somber reflection, ended in quiet finality. The family secret, the one I had uncovered with so much effort, was now in the open. Julian's game was over and justice had begun. The truth had been revealed. "Are you okay?" Kyle asked softly as we watched Julian being escorted out. I didn't answer right away. I watched as Julian disappeared through the door, escorted by the federal agents, my mind racing with a mixture of emotions, relief, sorrow, even guilt. But deep down, I knew I had done what was necessary. "I will be," I said finally, my voice steady, though I felt a weight I couldn't shake. Eventually, we stood in the quiet aftermath, knowing that our lives, and the lives of everyone in this room, would never be the same. The office was quiet when I arrived, the soft hum of the air conditioning the only sound in the sterile, white space. I walked to the small conference room where David had arranged to meet me. He had been one of Grandpa's closest colleagues, a former military strategist who had always been a bit of a mystery to me growing up. I'd heard whispers about his involvement in projects that were too sensitive to be discussed, even among family, but I had never asked. Now, it seemed I had no choice but to dig into that part of Grandpa's world. David stood at the table when I walked in, his gray hair more silver now than it had been the last time I saw him. His eyes were sharp, even with age, and his posture still carried the air of a man who had spent decades in high-stakes environments. "Good to see you again, Daria," he said, offering me a handshake. There was a weariness in his voice, though, something I hadn't noticed before. You've done more than anyone could have expected. His gaze flickered to the file on the table between us, one that I'd seen in my grandfather's garage not long ago, the file that contained the secrets that had been buried for so many years. I nodded, sitting down. I didn't have much choice, David. I had to know what Grandpa had been involved in, and what Julian's role is in all of this. David hesitated before sitting across from me, his face hardening, as though the weight of the past few decades had finally caught up to him. Your grandfather was part of something bigger than anyone knew. Operation Peregrine was never just about Cold War tactics. It was a network that's been quietly reactivated in the last few years. I felt a chill run through me. What do you mean by reactivated? I asked, leaning forward. David took a breath, his hands clasped on the table. There are people who've spent years positioning themselves in the shadows. Many of them thought the operation was buried after the Cold War. But your grandfather, he knew it wouldn't stay dead. So he kept his eye on it, waiting for the right moment. And now, that moment has arrived. It's not just about military operations anymore. It's about control, power, and influence. I swallowed hard, my heart racing. I had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed, hearing the depth of it laid out so plainly, was a shock. Grandpa knew what was coming, I said, almost to myself. He tried to warn me. He told me about the signs I should look for if something happened to him. David nodded. He trusted you, Daria. He trusted you more than anyone. You've carried on his legacy without even knowing it. By exposing Julian's betrayal, you've stopped something that could have torn apart everything your grandfather worked for. My chest tightened. The weight of responsibility felt heavier than I'd ever imagined. I had thought that uncovering the truth would bring me peace. But now, knowing that the very network Grandpa had tried to protect was still alive and well, it felt like the burden had only deepened. But what does this mean now? I asked, almost afraid of the answer. For me? For my family? David's expression softened, and he leaned back in his chair. It means the truth is out there now, Daria, but it also means that you've become part of this larger story. Whether you like it or not, you've inherited your grandfather's role in protecting national security. He had a plan for what to do with the information he collected, and you've unwittingly followed it. I felt a lump in my throat, the enormity of his words settling on me. I wasn't just dealing with my brother's betrayal anymore. This was about something far larger than family loyalty. This was about honor, duty, and the preservation of the values my grandfather had spent his life protecting. I didn't ask for this, I muttered, though I knew it didn't change anything. I just wanted to protect my family. But now, I'm responsible for something I didn't even understand. David studied me for a long moment. You're not the first to carry a burden like this, Daria. The world doesn't always give us a choice. But your grandfather chose you because he knew you had the strength to handle it. And because you understand the cost of what's at stake. Some things are just too important to ignore. I looked down at the file in front of me, the one that held so many answers, and yet so many more questions. What happens now? David stood up and walked to the window, his back to me. He took a long time to answer, and when he finally spoke, it was in a voice that carried both resolve and sorrow. Now you continue what your grandfather started. You use the information he left you, and you stop this operation from growing any further. There are people out there who want to keep the past alive for their own purposes. Your job is to make sure they don't succeed. I stood up too, feeling the weight of his words settle over me. This was my new reality now. The legacy Grandpa had left behind was mine to carry, whether I was ready or not. Thank you, David, I said quietly. For everything? He nodded but didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. We both knew that the future held more than we could predict. But one thing was certain. I couldn't walk away. I wouldn't. As I left his office, my mind was already racing with the next steps. Julian's betrayal wasn't just the end of his story, it was the beginning of something else entirely. And it was up to me to finish what Grandpa had started. The room was filled with the sharp scent of polished wood and freshly pressed uniforms. A new class of military officers sat in front of me, their faces a mixture of anticipation and curiosity. They were eager, ready to learn, ready to be molded into the officers they were about to become. I could feel the weight of their gaze, their eyes fixed on me. They knew my name, of course. Daria Caldwell, retired Army lieutenant, granddaughter of Colonel James Caldwell. But I wasn't here to be celebrated. I was here to teach, to pass on the lessons I had learned through years of service, years of sacrifice. I stood at the podium, my hands resting on the wood. the familiar, comforting weight of my uniform reminding me of everything I had been through, everything I had sacrificed. The room was silent as I cleared my throat and began my speech, my voice steady, but with the remnants of something heavier beneath it. Integrity, I began, looking out at the young faces before me, is the foundation of everything we do. It's what keeps us grounded when the world around us spins out of control. It's the backbone of every decision we make, no matter how difficult. And it's something we must always carry with us, whether we're in the field or standing in front of a classroom like this. I paused, letting my words hang in the air. The cadets were listening, their eyes fixed on me, but I couldn't help but feel a disconnect. My experiences, the truths I had uncovered, the personal cost of what I had done, weighed heavily on my heart. My grandfather's legacy, my brother's betrayal, the choices I had made, it had all brought me here, to this moment, and it had changed me. Sometimes the hardest thing we'll ever do is stand by our convictions when it feels like the entire world is against us. I continued. I've learned that the truth is a heavy burden to carry. It comes with a price, sometimes the loss of family, sometimes the loss of comfort, sometimes the loss of everything you thought you knew, but you can't compromise on integrity, not for anyone. Not for anything. A cadet in the front row raised a hand. I nodded, gesturing for him to speak. He hesitated for a moment, then asked, Lieutenant Caldwell, I understand the importance of integrity, but what happens when your loyalty to your family clashes with your duty? How do you balance the two? The question stung. The very question I had been grappling with for months. I looked at the cadet, the quiet weight of his words sinking in. The silence in the room felt deafening, but I knew I had to answer. I couldn't back down now, not after everything. I took a deep breath and let it out slowly. That's a question I've struggled with my entire life. Loyalty to family is one of the most powerful things we can experience. But duty to your country, your commitment to protect, to defend, to uphold the law, that's something that supersedes everything. It's a sacrifice. And sometimes that sacrifice comes in the form of family. It's painful. It tears you apart. But you have to stand firm in your duty, even when it costs you the most precious thing you have. The room was quiet after my words. The cadet who had asked the question nodded, his face thoughtful, as if my answer had given him something to ponder. I knew it wasn't easy to understand. I had been there myself, torn between what I knew was right and the love I had for my family. But I had made my choice, and it had cost me. But in the end, it was the only choice I could make. I looked out at the rest of the class, meeting the eyes of each cadet, one by one. You'll all face moments like this, moments when your loyalty to your loved ones will be tested. But remember this, and when your integrity is compromised, everything else falls apart. You can't protect your family if you aren't standing for what's right. You can't serve your country if you aren't willing to put your honor first. The room felt heavier than before. The weight of the lesson was no longer just mine. It was theirs too. I could see the change in their eyes, the realization that they would one day have to make difficult choices. And I hoped, deep down, that they would remember this lesson when the time came. I finished my speech and let the cadets file out, their footsteps echoing in the quiet room. I stayed behind for a moment, looking out the window at the city below. It was a beautiful day, but I felt no joy in it, no peace. Kyle was waiting for me outside the door. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there, offering me the silent support I had come to rely on. We didn't need words between us. He had been there through everything, through the darkest moments, through the times when I questioned if I had done the right thing. How do you feel? He finally asked, his voice soft but steady. I paused for a moment, the weight of the question heavier than I expected. I don't know, I admitted. I thought giving this speech would give me some closure, but I still feel like I'm carrying something. Something I can't shake. Kyle nodded, understanding. It's not going to be easy, but you did what you had to do. I looked at him, grateful for his presence, for his unwavering support. I just hope it was enough. I hope I've done the right thing. He smiled slightly, his eyes warm with reassurance. You have, and no matter what happens next, you've upheld your honor, and that's all anyone can ask. I leaned against the wall, my thoughts swirling. My grandfather's legacy, my brother's betrayal, the choices I had made, it was all still there, pressing down on me. But I had done what I could. I had followed the truth, even when it led me down a dark path. And as I stood there with Kyle by my side, I knew that the weight of the past was something I would carry for the rest of my life. But I also knew that I had chosen to stand for what was right. The truth, no matter the cost.